I've always believed that creative people are meant to be alone. At least that's what I told myself for years, holed up in my apartment with my digital tablet and coffee addiction. My name is Nathan Collins, and until last winter, I was convinced that my life as a freelance illustrator was complete with just my art, my cat Perseus, and my weekly video calls with my sister in California. The Chicago winters had always been brutal, but that particular January morning was especially merciless. I woke up to find my apartment feeling like an icebox, my breath visible in the air. Perseus was huddled against my neck, his usual morning food demands replaced by desperate attempts to stay warm. "Great," I muttered, checking my phone. The temperature outside was -15, and my heating system had chosen this perfect moment to die. I pulled on 2 sweaters and called the maintenance number I'd never used in my 3 years of living in the lakeside apartments. "Maintenance, this is Jamie," a warm voice answered, somehow making even those simple words sound like a comforting cup of hot chocolate. "Hi, I'm in 4B. My heat's completely out, and I'm pretty sure my cat is plotting to skin me for my body heat." He chuckled, a rich sound that seemed to travel through the phone and settle somewhere in my chest. "Can't have that happening. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just hang tight, okay?" Exactly 19 minutes later, yes, I was counting, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a tall man with auburn hair tucked under a worn baseball cap, wearing navy coveralls with Jamie embroidered over the pocket. His face was dusted with freckles, and laugh lines crinkled around his green eyes as he smiled. "Heard someone's cat is staging a mutiny?" he said by way of greeting. I stepped back to let him in, suddenly very aware that I was wearing mismatched socks, and my hair probably looked like Perseus had been nesting in it. Yeah, he's usually more of a benevolent dictator, but the cold has radicalized him. Jamie laughed again, and I noticed how the sound seemed to fill up all the empty spaces in my apartment. Perseus immediately abandoned his blanket nest to investigate the newcomer, circling Jamie's boots with unusual interest. "Well, hello there, revolution leader." Jamie crouched down to scratch Perseus behind the ears. The traitor immediately started purring. "Let's see about getting your kingdom warmed up, shall we?" I watched as Jamie moved through my apartment with quiet efficiency, checking the thermostat, and then heading to the utility closet. There was something fascinating about the way he worked, confident but gentle, like someone who understood that everything broken deserved care rather than force. "So, you're an artist?" he called out from where he was examining the heating unit. I glanced at my workspace, where my tablet displayed the children's book illustration I'd been working on. "Illustrator, yeah, mainly children's books and editorial work. That's amazing," he emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. "My daughter loves illustrated books. She's 7, completely obsessed with drawing." "You have a daughter?" The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately wanted to kick myself. Of course he had a daughter. Of course he was straight. Of course this warm feeling in my chest was completely inappropriate. "Yeah, Sophie. She lives with her mom most of the time, but I get her every other weekend." There was no bitterness in his voice, just pride when he mentioned his daughter. "Found the problem, by the way. The igniter's shot, and there's a small gas valve issue. I've got the parts in my truck. Should have you warm again in about an hour." As he worked, we talked. He told me about Sophie's latest art project, a comic book about a superhero cat who saves the world from evil vacuum cleaners. I showed him some of my illustrations, and he asked thoughtful questions about my process. It was the longest conversation I'd had with someone in person in months, and something about it felt dangerously comfortable. "There we go," he said finally, closing up the access panel. Warm air was already beginning to flow through the vents. "Give it about 30 minutes to really get going. If you have any problems, just call. I'm always around." "Thank you," I said, walking him to the door. "Really, I appreciate it. Just doing my job," he smiled, but he lingered for a moment at the doorway. "Hey, if Sophie wanted to show you some of her drawings sometime, would that be okay? She's always asking about meeting a real artist." "I'd like that," I said, perhaps too quickly. "I mean, sure, that would be fine." After he left, I stood in my gradually warming apartment, trying to ignore the way my heart was beating slightly too fast. Perseus meowed at me accusingly. "Don't start," I told him. He's straight, he's divorced, he's just being nice. But that night, as I worked on my illustrations, I found myself drawing a character with auburn hair and freckles, and I knew I was in trouble. 2 weeks passed, and I found myself inventing reasons to call maintenance. A dripping faucet, a squeaky door hinge, a loose cabinet handle. Each time, Jamie would appear with his toolbox and that warm smile, fixing whatever minor issue I discovered while we talked about everything and nothing. On his third visit, while fixing the cabinet handle, I deliberately loosened, not my proudest moment. He looked up at me with those knowing green eyes. "You know," he said, tightening the last screw, "if you want to talk, you don't need to break things. We could grab coffee sometime." I felt my face flush. That obvious, huh? "Well, I've never met anyone with such consistently minor maintenance issues," he grinned. "Plus, Perseus gives you away. He looks way too smug every time I show up." The next day, we met at a small coffee shop around the corner from our building. Jamie was wearing jeans and a forest green sweater that made his eyes look even more striking. I tried not to stare. "So," he said, stirring his Americano, "want to tell me what's really going on?" I took a deep breath. I'm not very good at people. I work from home. Most of my clients I never meet in person. And apart from my sister's calls, I can go days without actually talking to anyone except Perseus. "And then your heater broke," he supplied. "And then my heater broke," I agreed. "And you were kind and easy to talk to, and I guess I didn't want to go back to the silence." Jamie was quiet for a moment, studying his coffee. "Can I tell you something?" When I nodded, he continued, "After my divorce, after coming out, I felt the same way, like I was speaking a language nobody around me understood. My heart stopped, then started again at double speed." "You're half gay?" "Yeah," he smiled slightly. "Took me until I was 35 to figure it out. Sarah, my ex-wife, she was actually amazing about it. Said some things suddenly made sense. How did Sophie take it?" His face softened at the mention of his daughter. "Kids are incredible, you know? She just asked if this meant she could have 2 dads someday, then went back to her coloring book. We talked for hours. He told me about growing up in rural Wisconsin, marrying his high school sweetheart because it seemed like the thing to do, and the slow, terrifying realization that he was living a life that didn't fit. I told him about my own coming out at 23, about my parents' strained acceptance, about throwing myself into art as a way to create worlds where I felt less alone. "Sophie's coming over this weekend," he said, as we finally prepared to leave. "She's still asking about meeting you. Maybe you could join us for lunch on Saturday, if you want to?" "I'd love to," I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. Saturday arrived with a mix of sunshine and nervous energy. I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear before heading to the small pizza place where we'd agreed to meet. I heard Sophie before I saw them, a bright laugh that sounded just like her father's. She was a miniature whirlwind with Jamie's auburn hair and freckles, clutching a sketchbook almost as big as she was. "Are you really, Nathan? Daddy says you draw pictures for real books." "Sophie," Jamie said gently, "remember what we talked about?" Inside voice, "Sorry," she whispered dramatically, then immediately launched into showing me her sketchbook. Lunch turned into ice cream, which turned into a walk in the nearby park. Sophie skipped ahead of us, stopping occasionally to draw something that caught her eye. "She's amazing," I said, watching her carefully sketch a squirrel. "Yeah, she is," Jamie agreed softly. "Thank you for today. It means a lot to her, to both of us." Our hands brushed as we walked, and neither of us pulled away. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates. Jamie would stop by my apartment even when nothing needed fixing, just to share takeout and talk. We discovered we both loved old sci-fi movies, had strong opinions about pizza toppings, and could talk for hours about nothing in particular. Sophie became a regular presence in my life too. She declared my apartment her art studio and would spend hours at my desk, drawing while I worked on my illustrations. Jamie would watch us both with a soft expression that made my heart ache in the best way. One evening, after Sophie had gone home with her mother, Jamie and I were sitting on my couch, half watching a movie. Perseus was curled up between us, purring contentedly. "I got offered a children's book series," I said suddenly. 6 books, about a maintenance man who secretly fixes magical problems in an apartment building. Jamie turned to look at me, his eyes crinkling. Wonder where you got that idea? Well, the protagonist doesn't have your freckles. That would be too obvious. Shame, he murmured, reaching over to brush my hair back from my face. I like being obvious with you. When he kissed me, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. His hands were gentle, calloused from work, but so tender as they cradled my face. Perseus made an annoyed noise and jumped off the couch, but for once I didn't care about appeasing my feline overlord. Spring arrived in Chicago, bringing with it new beginnings and unexpected challenges. Jamie and I had fallen into a comfortable routine. He'd come over after work, sometimes with Sophie, sometimes just the two of us. On weekends, we'd explore the city together, discovering little art galleries and hole-in-the-wall restaurants that became our special places. One Sunday morning, as we lay in bed with Perseus walking across our legs demanding breakfast, Jamie propped himself up on one elbow and looked at me seriously. My lease is up next month, he said. Oh. I tried to keep my voice casual, though my heart had started racing. I was thinking, I'm here most nights anyway, and Sophie loves it here. And Perseus clearly thinks I'm acceptable. Are you asking to move in with me? I smiled, reaching up to trace the freckles across his nose. Actually, he said, catching my hand and kissing my palm, I was thinking maybe we could look for a new place together. Something with more space, maybe a proper art studio for you, and a room for Sophie. The idea of creating a home together, of building something permanent, was both thrilling and terrifying. What about the building, your job? They've got 3 other maintenance engineers. And honestly, I've been thinking about starting my own contracting business. I've got the experience, the contacts. Jamie Mitchell, are you planning our future? He grinned. Is that okay? Instead of answering, I pulled him down for a kiss. House hunting turned out to be an adventure in itself. Sophie appointed herself our official property inspector, carrying around a small notepad where she wrote things like "good drawing light" and "cat approved." We finally found a townhouse in Lincoln Park. 3 bedrooms, with a converted attic space perfect for my studio, and a small backyard where Sophie immediately planned a fairy garden. Moving day was chaos. My sister Emma flew in from California to help, immediately bonding with Sophie over their shared mission to organize my art supplies. Sarah, Jamie's ex-wife, even stopped by with pizza for everyone, her new husband Mike, helping Jamie move the heavy furniture. Watching them all work together, laughing and teasing, I felt overwhelmed by how much my life had changed in just a few months. Emma caught me standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes and emotion. You okay, little brother? She asked softly. Yeah, I managed. It's just a lot, good lot, but you're waiting for the other shoe to drop? She hugged me. Not everything breaks, Nate. Sometimes things just work. That evening, after everyone had left and Sophie had gone home with Sarah, Jamie and I sat on our new back steps. Perseus was cautiously exploring his new territory, and the spring air was warm with promise. What are you thinking? Jamie asked, wrapping an arm around me. I'm thinking about how my heater breaking was the best thing that ever happened to me. But life, as it tends to do, threw us some curveballs. Jamie's new business was taking off, but the irregular hours and stress of being self-employed took their toll. I had deadlines for my book series, and sometimes we'd go days barely seeing each other, despite living in the same house. Our first big fight came 3 months after moving in. Jamie had missed dinner, again, because a client had an emergency. I'd been stressed about a revision deadline, and what started as a simple discussion about communication turned into something bigger. I can't just ignore emergency calls, Nathan. This is my business. I'm not asking you to ignore them. I'm asking you to let me know when you'll be late, so I'm not sitting here worried. Well, maybe if you left the house occasionally, instead of hiding in your studio all day. We both stopped, the words hanging heavy between us. Perseus darted under the couch, and I could feel tears threatening. Jamie's face softened immediately. I'm sorry. That was unfair. No, I said quietly. You're right. I have been hiding. Sometimes it feels like everything's changing so fast, and I'm not sure how to keep up. He crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. We'll figure it out. Together. And we did. We started having weekly schedule meetings, planning our time better. I made an effort to take some of my work to local cafes to join professional groups for illustrators. Jamie hired an assistant to help manage his growing business, and we made sure to protect our family dinners with Sophie. Sophie, for her part, thrived in our new arrangement. She turned one of the kitchen walls into her art gallery, covering it with her drawings. She started calling me Papa Nathan without any prompting, the first time reducing me to tears in the middle of making pancakes. One evening, after helping her with an art project for school, I found Jamie watching us from the doorway. "What?" I asked, self-conscious. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he said. "How one broken heater led to all of this." As our first year together drew to a close, life settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Jamie's business had grown enough that he could be more selective with his projects, and my book series about the magical maintenance man had become surprisingly successful, with fan art appearing online and kids writing letters about their favorite magical repairs. One autumn afternoon, while Jamie was at a job site and Sophie was at school, I received an unexpected call from Sarah. "Nathan, do you have a minute?" Her voice sounded worried. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Sophie's teacher called. Apparently, some kids were teasing her about having two dads. She got upset and locked herself in the bathroom. "I'm stuck in a meeting I can't leave, and Jamie's not answering." "I'll go," I said immediately, already grabbing my keys. "Text me the school details." When I arrived at Sophie's school, I found her sitting in the counselor's office, her face tear-stained but defiant. She ran to me as soon as she saw me. "Papa Nathan!" She buried her face in my shirt. The counselor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, smiled warmly. "You must be Nathan. Sophie's told me a lot about you." After some paperwork and reassurances, I took Sophie for ice cream, our traditional crisis management technique. As she picked at her sundae, I waited. "Tommy Baker said I was weird for having 3 parents," she finally said. "He said families are supposed to have one mom and one dad, not a mom and stepdad and 2 dads. And what do you think about that?" She looked up at me, her green eyes so like Jamie's. "I think Tommy Baker is stupid. I have more people to love me, so I win." I had to blink back tears. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart." That evening, after we'd told Jamie what happened, the 3 of us sat in the backyard. Sophie was drawing her newest comic, this one featuring a superhero family with multiple parents, while Jamie and I watched the sunset. "You know," Jamie said softly, "seeing you drop everything to go to her today, it made me realize something." "What's that?" He turned to face me, taking my hand. "That I want to marry you." I stared at him, my heart stopping then racing. "Jamie, I mean it," he continued. "I want to make this official. I want Sophie to know that her family, unconventional as it might be, is permanent. I want to wake up next to you every morning and argue about whose turn it is to feed Perseus and... Nathan Collins, will you marry me?" "Daddy!" Sophie's indignant voice cut through the moment. "You're doing it wrong. You're supposed to get down on one knee." Jamie laughed, but he did as his daughter commanded, kneeling in front of my chair. "Better? Much better," Sophie approved. "Papa Nathan, you're supposed to say yes now." "Oh, am I?" I laughed through my tears. "Obviously." She rolled her eyes in that dramatic way only 7-year-olds can manage. Well, then I pulled Jamie up to kiss him. "Yes, obviously yes." We were married the following spring in our backyard. Sophie was our best artist, creating all the invitations and decorations. Sarah and Mike helped with the planning. Emma flew in early to help transform the space, and Perseus supervised everything from his perch on the fence. The ceremony was small but perfect. Sophie read a poem she'd written about different kinds of families. Jamie's parents, who had struggled initially with his coming out, stood proudly beside my own parents. Even some of Jamie's regular clients came, the ones who'd become friends over the years. Our vows were simple. Jamie promised to always fix whatever was broken, whether it was a faucet or a bad day. I promised to keep creating worlds where everyone could find their place, starting with our own little family. At the reception, Sarah pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said, hugging me, "for loving them both so well." Later that night, after the guests had gone and Sophie was asleep in her room, Jamie and I danced slowly in our kitchen to no music at all. "Happy?" he asked, his forehead resting against mine. "More than I ever thought possible," I answered honestly. Perseus wove between our legs, apparently approving of this quiet moment. Outside, the Chicago spring was turning to summer, and somewhere in the house, Sophie's art covered the walls, telling the story of our family in crayon and marker. Looking back now, I realize that some things do break for a reason. My heater broke so Jamie could fix it. My solitude broke so love could fill the spaces. And sometimes the life you think is complete breaks open to reveal something even better, waiting inside. Jamie still fixes things around our house, though now he usually has Sophie as his assistant, teaching her about tools and repairs while I sketch them both, adding to my ever-growing collection of family moments. We're not perfect. We still argue about schedules and chores, still have days when everything feels complicated, but we're perfect for each other. And every winter, when the heat kicks on in our home, I smile, remembering that cold January morning when a broken heater led me to everything I never knew I needed. The story of the maintenance man and the illustrator might seem ordinary to some, but to us, it's extraordinary. A reminder that love can find you in the most unexpected places, that family can look different for everyone, and that sometimes the things that seem broken are really just waiting for the right person to fix them. Perseus naturally takes credit for the whole thing. After all, he says with his smug cat smile, he approved of Jamie first.